Okay, good morning. Today is Wednesday. It is Zayin Ir, Tavshin Ayin Daled. We are in Sefer Mamar Teres Menachem, Tavshin Yud Aleph, Tavshin Yud Beis, on page 274, Ayin Daled Reish. We are beginning the Mamar of Shabbos Pasha Shmini Mevorcha Machedesh Ir Tavshin Yud Beis. Dibur Maschil Livyasan Zeh Yatzartah l'Sachik Boi. Livyasan Zeh Yatzartah l'Sachik Boi. This Leviathan which you have formed to sport with it. This is a verse, a pasuk in Tilim, chapter 104, which we recite on Rosh Chodesh. It's in Borchi Nafshi. And I guess the connection is because in Parsha Shmini it talks about the animals that are the kosher and unkosher animals and so on and so forth, and also it's Shabbos Mevorchim Ir, so it's the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. So Hashem, it says that Hashem created all these wonderful things in the world, and He also created the Leviathan with which to sport. The Isa B'Gemara, so the Talmud in the Masechta Avodah Zarah, Tractate Avodah Zarah, says, Yud Beis Shoyis Have Hayom. There are 12 hours in the day. What does Hashem do all day? So the Gemara says as follows: Yud Gimel Shoyas Rishonos, the first 3 hours of the day. Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yeshiv V'Esek B'Torah. Hashem sits and learns Torah, is occupied with learning Torah. Gimel Shoyis Shniyos. The second set of 3 hours, the second quarter of the day, Yoshev V'Don. He sits and he judges the world. And the Gemara goes on and says that when he sees that the world is in bad shape, so to speak, that it's if he's going to judge it in the proper way, then who knows what can be brought in the world. So Hashem gets up from the throne, from the seat of judgment, and moves himself to the seat of mercy, and he judges the world. He gives the world clemency. Gimel Shoyis Shlishiyos, the third set of 3 hours, Yeshiv V'Zon. He sits and he sustains the world. It says over the Talmud, it says Mikar Nira Eimim, which I think believes from the horned buffalo, Ad Be'ekinim, to the, I think the translation is even to a brood of vermin. In other words, from the greatest beast to the smallest creature. Gimel Shoyis Reviyos, the fourth set of 3 hours, Shu Seif HaYom, which is the end of the day, is Mantfilas Mincha, the time for davening Mincha. Yoshev Mesachikim Livyasan. He sits and he sports with the Leviathan. With the Leviathan, with the Livyasan. Shenemar, as it says in the verse, Livyasan Zeh Yatzartah l'Sachik. This Leviathan that you have formed to sport with it. What does that mean? Explains the Rebbe, what's this idea of Livyasan Zeh Yatzartah l'Sachik? What is this idea of the Leviathan? And what is the idea of Hashem sporting with the Leviathan? Of course, we know that in Chazal it says that when Mashiach is going to come, there's going to be a Suda, a meal, a feast for the tzaddikim, and Hashem is going to serve fish, which is going to be the Leviathan, and then meat, the Sheir Habar, the great ox, and then also Yain HaMeshumar, the wine that has been stored away, especially for this occasion. There are differences of opinion whether this is factual or this is metaphoric. The consensus is that it's factual. The Marsha and Baba Basra says some very strong words about it in his Kedushim, that even though there are different commentators that interpret it in different ways, we have to believe in it in a simple sense. But of course, even if it is something which is physical in the physical sense, that will happen nevertheless, obviously there's a deep spiritual element which is concealed and symbolized within this idea. And that's what the Rebbe addresses here. What is the spiritual meaning of this Leviathan and Hashem sporting with the Leviathan? And the idea is, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah, that the word Livyasan is from the expression, and he quotes the verse in Pashas Vayetze that Leah said when she gave birth to Levi. She called him Levi. Why? Her third child. Because Apam Yilavi Ishi this time my husband will be attached to me. Once I've born him a third son, he will now be attached to me. So we see that the idea of Yilove, Levi, Livyasan is from the expression of being attached, of attachment. What does that mean in the context of what we're learning here? Hainu losh nischabrus. In other words, Yilove, Livyasan is from the expression of connection, of being connected or fused. What is that a reference to? This is a reference to souls, because the idea of souls is what is the function of a soul? The function of a soul is to effectuate the fusion of worlds with godliness. That's what neshamas do. So, in other words, Livyasan is a reference to souls. So, what does it mean? Hashem sports with the Livyasan? The inyan mesachikim Livyasan, and the idea of Hashem sporting with Livyasan with the souls. Hainu, it means, in other words, Shakadosh Baruch Hu misaneg, that Hashem has pleasure, me'avedas hanashames, from the service of the souls, lechaber elmes v'lekus, to connect worlds with godliness. So, in other words, Livyasan Zeh Yatzartah l'sachik b'y means Hashem having pleasure from the Livyasan, the souls who connect worlds with godliness. So he has pleasure from Avedas and Hashems, the service of the souls. Why does he have such pleasure? The Rebbe brings a metaphor from a phenomena down here below. That in order to arouse laughter and pleasure by a ruler, and certainly by a king, you can't bring this about by giving him something great and something very precious. Why? What gift can you possibly give to someone who has everything? By a ruler and by a king, even the most precious item is meaningless. It's only specifically through something innovative, which is opposite, which is unnatural. For example, the tzipram daberes through a talking bird, a parrot, which is an interesting, unusual phenomena. Although that the speech of the bird is not comparable to the speech of man, because speech of man is obviously far more sophisticated, etc. So why should the king be, or this ruler be, intrigued by a talking bird? But nevertheless, because of the unusualness, the innovation in this phenomena, this causes laughter and pleasure. What's the moral of this parable? So too it is also in the moral of this parable, concerning the fusion of worlds with godliness, through the service of souls down here below. So in other words, the souls down here below are like a talking bird. Relative to what? You know, on your phone you have talking Tom or talking parrot, whatever it's called, and everybody goes crazy because it's unusual, right? You could say very sophisticated Gemaras and Mamar Chazal and davening, and it repeats it exactly the way it is, right? So so the neshama down here is like a talking parrot, like a talking bird, relative to what? To the soul the way it is above. Why does Hashem have pleasure from the soul down here far more than the soul up there, when the soul up there before it comes down is far more sophisticated and advanced than the soul coming down here? So he says, although the service of the neshama down here, the way it serves Hashem down here below, is totally incomparable to the way in which it serves Hashem when it is up above before it comes down into the body. Why? This is a quote from Tanya, because even someone who is a total tzaddik, serving Hashem with fear and with love, with great love, to the extent that he has pleasure from the love in Hashem. The way that the soul is down here, he is in the mode of a yesh, of a being that loves, as opposed to the soul the way it is up above, where it's totally bottled and nullified. Bittul b'metzias, totally bottled, totally nullified. And as much as the soul will strive down here below, it will not reach the level of the soul the way it is up above. So why does Hashem have such great pleasure specifically from the service of the soul down here below, as opposed to what? The service of the soul above, far more than the service of the soul up above. Nevertheless, because of the innovation, the uniqueness of the phenomena, of the soul serving a soul down below in this physical world, serving Hashem, this causes pleasure and laughter above. This is the idea of this Leviathan that you have created, you Hashem have created, have formed, in order to sport with it. In other words, Livyasan Zeh Yatzartah is a reference to the service of souls down here in this physical world, serving Hashem, from which Hashem has great pleasure, far greater than the pleasure that He has from the service of souls before they come down into this world. Now,
so when we all start serving like that, it won't be unusual. So Hashem won't get pleasure as much.
We have a long way to go. Then I was going to explain soon that there are different levels in Neshamas. There's Livyasan, there's Shiur. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, when does Hashem sport with the soul? With the souls down here? When does He have pleasure from the Avedis and Neshamas? It says, in the last quarter of the day. Right? That's what the Rebbe addresses in the next section. And the idea of Hashem sitting and sporting with the Leviathan is when? It's in the 3 last hours in the third quarter of the day. What's the idea of the third quarter of the day? For the day consists of 12 hours. Chulu, etc. Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, has 4 letters. 4 letters can give you 12 combinations. Hashem's name, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud Adnai, also has 12 letters. The day is divided into 12 hours because of the 12 different combinations of Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Every hour has a different combination, which changes on the hour. And that's why it's broken down into 12 hours. The night is dominated by Hashem's name, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud Adnai. And that also has 12 combinations. So that causes the division of the 12 hours of the night. But the day has 12 combinations of Shem Havaya, which illuminate, which shine, which are present in every hour. In other words, every hour has a different tzira, a different combination of Shem Havaya. So although there are 12 hours in the day, nevertheless there is a division, mainly in a more general way. The day is divided in 4 parts. And what are the 4 parts? What happens in these 4 parts? What does it result as? Why is the day divided generally into 4 parts? Because because each section of the 4 hours Hashem does something else, right? Each 3 hours something else happens. In the first 3 hours Hashem sits and is occupied with learning Torah. What does that mean? If you remember, we learned in a previous Mamar, and the Rebbe refers to it over here, the Mamar of Yudalef Nisan Ad Nes Faseh Tiftach.
And those 3 hours start at what time?
When day starts.
Which is 6 o'clock in the morning?
That changes.
It's the 3 hours before Mincha.
No, 3 hours. The first 3 hours is the beginning of
The beginning of the day.
The beginning of the day. It's the beginning of the day, right? Yeah.
Of course, the day and night are not. There are 2 types of hours. There's what's called Shos Zmaniyos and Shos Beiniyos. There are the usual hours of 60 minutes, but then there's when the day is equally divided between day and night, 12 hours daytime, 12 hours nighttime. So it's for the purpose of that, you're talking about hours of 60 minutes. When the day is longer than the night, or vice versa, you still divide the day and night into 12 hours, but some hours will be longer, some hours will be shorter. In terms of 60 minutes, more longer than 60 minutes,
depending on
shorter
what
than 60
time of
minutes.
the year it is.
Correct. But you divide them for this purpose into 12 equal parts. So we learned in the Mamar Ad Nes Faseh Tiftach of Yudalef Nisan that there are 2 levels in Torah, if you remember. One level of Torah which is called Tal Torah, like dew, which comes from above. It's not dependent on us. Hashem learns Torah on His own without us triggering Him to learn Torah, to respond to us. But then there is also that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yeshiv V'Esek V'Torah. Hashem sits and learns Torah on His own. But then there is Kol HaKerev V'Sheina HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kerev V'Sheina K'negdei. Whoever learns, Hashem responds to his learning. In other words, our learning triggers Hashem's learning. So what does it mean? It means there are 2 levels in Torah. One is from Hashem on His own.
From above to below, below to above.
Correct, exactly. That was in the Mamar of Yudalef Nisan. So the Rebbe says here like this: the idea of the first 3 hours of Hashem sitting and occupying Himself with learning Torah This is a reference to Hashem sitting and learning Torah on his own commission. As we explained earlier, and if you look in the footnote, in the reference, he refers to the Mamar Adnes Fasei Tiftach of Yudalef Nisan that we learned before. As we learned before, Ha'hefresh Bein Masha Amr Razal, the difference between the saying of our sages. Whoever reads and learns, whoever learns Chumash and learns Mishnah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sits opposite him and responds and learns the Chumash and the Mishnah that he's learning. So there's a difference between that, a difference between that and the idea of Hashem sitting the first 3 hours of the day and learning Torah. The Inyan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kerev Hashem connected, the idea of Hashem sitting opposite a person and responding to the learning that was triggered by what? By the person learning. That is related to the whole day. Whenever a person sits and learns, it causes Hashem to respond and learn opposite him. Which is koyal This refers to the awakening from above, which comes as a result of the awakening from below. It's triggered by the person. As opposed to the idea of the first 3 hours of the day where Hashem sits and occupies himself in learning Torah. This is a reference to the awakening from above on its own, which is not dependent on the awakening from below. This is the idea of the dew of Torah. Dew comes from above on its own. It's also called with the name the light of Torah, which means to say it's something that comes from above on its own, as opposed to rain. And this has an effect also on the hours that follow it. In other words, the learning of Hashem's Torah in the first segment of the day, the first 3 hours, affects what follows. Which means that although in the second segment of the 3 hours, Hashem sits and judges the world, and as mentioned before, the Gemara says that when he sees that the world is not meritorious, and according to the din, there are consequences, negative consequences. So nevertheless, and from the perspective of Midas Adin, the measure of judgment, even the heavens are not meritorious in Hashem's eyes, and he also, the angels are also deserving of rebuke. Nevertheless, as a result of the first 3 hours of Hashem sitting and learning Torah, which are the 3 heads of the level of Atik, which is the inner dimension of Kesed. In other words, the highest levels where our actions do not reach, so to speak. This comes from Hashem Himself. This is the idea of Hashem's awakening from above on His own. This causes the effect is felt in the second segment of the 3 hours. This divine flow is drawn down below. So in other words, that Hashem moves from the throne of judgment to the throne of mercy, and that moves into the third segment of the 3 hours, which is the third segment of the 3 hours, where he sustains the whole world, from the horns of the horned buffalo, to the broods of vermin, from the highest to the lowest. In the spiritual sense, it means that Hashem gives sustenance to the levels from even beyond the chain order of creation, ad lamata to the very lowest levels, from the depths of the highest levels to the depths of the lowest levels, which means, just to conclude, as a result of the first 3 hours of Hashem sitting and learning Torah on His own, which means to say, this is Hashem's initiative, he gets up from the throne, from the seat of judgment, and he sits down on the seat of mercy, and he judges the world merciful, and that translates into sustaining the world from the highest levels to the lowest levels in the physical sense, from the greatest beast to the smallest creature, and also from the highest levels of Ishtalshalus, beyond the chain order of creation, to the very lowest levels. Mitzvah shall continue tomorrow.